Note that inflation is much more benign than deflation in a monetary production economy. The main impact of inflation is on distribution of income. It tends to redistribute shares toward economically more powerful groups, from workers to capitalists, from non-unionized workers to unionized, from unskilled to skilled workers, from fixed income pensioners to those of working age, and from competitive sectors to oligopolistic sectors. On the other hand, inflation tends to reduce debt burdens and reduce inflation adjusted returns to creditors, which tends to favor lower income households as well as industry over finance. Thus, on balance, the effects of inflation may well be favorable towards encouraging investment and economic growth. In contrast, deflation not only has significant redistribution effects opposite to those listed above, but it also increases debt burden. This favors rentiers over debtors, but only if the debtors do not default. Significant deflation will generate bankruptcies, in which case even creditors are no better off. Indeed, Fisher's debt deflation theory, adopted by Minsky, attributes the severity of the Great Depression to price inflation that
Deflation.
price deflation that generated a snowball of bankruptcies and destroyed financial wealth. Thus, post Keynesians generally recognize that deflation is a much more serious problem than inflation.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a intuitive idea that I like it when prices go down because I can
So
get
I'm going to
more
use the
for my
restroom
money.
now, okay?
Okay, Neva's turn. So yeah, there's this intuitive idea that hey, if prices go down, that's better for me because I can spend more with my money, which is true. But as Nima just pointed out in what we were reading, that a deflationary pressure within the economy, it not only makes it a heavier burden for creditors, excuse me, for debtors, which is to say, okay, I borrowed $100,000 when I could work for $20 an hour, but now everything deflated and I only earn $10 an hour. Now the burden of that $100,000 debt has just doubled. So in a lot of cases, now extrapolate that to business. Let's say you've got a business that they've create some good or they do some service and they're in debt in order to make the business go. They got a loan and suddenly everything deflates. And even though all the prices deflate, all the wages deflate, they still owe the same amount of money, right? They still owe the same nominal in the language that we've been using. They still owe the same nominal payment. And if it gets to the point where they can't make the payment, the business collapses and the creditor now has a bad loan on their books. And if they get enough of those, the creditor collapses. So the whole thing just gets destroyed. And I think the Great Depression is a perfect example of this. The whole thing just gets destroyed. And it's not as simple as, well, hey, prices went down and now we could all spend more with our money. It's complicated, man. So with the inflation, I mean, nobody likes having their purchasing power robbed, clearly. But as I mean, when Nima gets back, we'll get into this more. It's obviously not as painful as deflation, and the conversation can start once we understand about this. Prices are administered from the top down process, and that money comes from government spending and the banking system, is to say, okay, what is the appropriate way to utilize that money creation process? I already mentioned it earlier with the what Richard Werner has mentioned, and I damn near everything I've seen him talk about, is we can create money to chase after assets that already exist, or we can create money for businesses that will create new goods and services. Or versus government deficit spending, Nima mentioned this. Okay, we can have give stimmy checks to everybody so they can go buy new flat screen TVs and do some minor home improvements by going to Lowe's and Home Depot, which are the only stores that are allowed to remain open because the small competitors aren't. That's not a significant improvement on the economy. Or even from the Build Back Better, I was listening to this some number of months ago where someone was showing John Stewart how stupid parts of the Build Back Better bill were, where something like $45 billion was spent by the federal government to expand broadband, and they connected 0 customers.
Well, and wasn't there like several billions spent on electric car batteries, and then they built like 2 stations or something?
Yeah, where it's, we could say, spending good, spending bad, but if we want to have a real conversation that looks at all the variables on the table, we could say, well, we want the spending to be accompanied by something productive and useful, and spending $45 billion in order to connect 0 people, or $1 billion to create 2 charging ports or whatever it was, clearly that does not meet that requirement. Right? So in the neoclassical, and especially the Austrian approach, is typically get government out of the way, let the private sector do whatever it wants. Get government out of the way, let the private sector do whatever it wants, which, I mean, I agree with. However, you have to understand that money itself is a public sector thing. The banking system is a public sector thing. Yes, they have market and private oriented pressures where they want to make money, but what they are allowed to do and what they're allowed to make money on is entirely regulation by the government. And it's not like, oh, hey, if we take away all that regulation, the banks can do it more effectively. No, if you took away all the regulation, there wouldn't be any banks. Because the banks have the ability to create money via the regulation, right? I mean, am I saying this, Nima, in a way that makes sense, or am I making it more confusing? You don't know. Okay. Point I'm trying to get at is instead of worrying about the national debt, this conversation actually started with me and Nima a couple days ago, pointing out the fact that people like Elon Musk are freaked out about the number on the wall. Look, the number's going up. It's bad. The number, the national debt. Instead of freaking out about the number, let's look at the nuance of everything going on here and say, how do we make intelligent decisions about, okay, yes, the number's increasing. As we just read, that might not be as bad as you think it is. The number's increasing.
The national net savings, the private sector's net savings. If you look at it that way, it doesn't sound so bad.
Yes. If everybody who's watching this now or recording could like, share, and subscribe it helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
I hate saying it, but it's just true.